Poverty, what is it? Better question, how do you measure it? You can't take its temperature or weigh it on a scale. If you're wondering any of these things, you're in the right place. Welcome to Perfecting Poverty Appraisal, a better definition and measurement. Oh yeah, and that's us.
How do we define poverty? Poverty is a state that exists when an individual lacks the capability to have quality of life above the standard needed to fully participate in their society. It is certainly related to money and resources, but the truth about poverty goes beyond those clear-cut reasons. Individuals need to participate in their society, whatever that might look like. Quality of life is about well-being, not just physical, but mental and emotional as well. Before we talk about measuring poverty, let's think about what this problem actually looks like in the United States today. According to a report written by Rachel Sheffield and Robert Rector in 2011, the concept of poverty in America might be widely distorted. When Americans think about poverty, many think about significant material hardship and deprivation. But most of the people classified by the U.S. Census Bureau as poor have a wide range of amenities, like air conditioning, a car, and television. They had access to medical care and adequate food and housing. In fact, the typical poor American has more living space than the average European. So, should those people not be considered poor? Rector argues that this misrepresentation of poverty could lead to the misallocation of government resources. And while it is important to have a more accurate description of what poverty looks like, we also need to recognize the way that standards of living change over time. His data about resources and amenities don't show us the extent to which families might have to make sacrifices in order to obtain them. Maybe a family has adequate housing and food on the table, but the parents are working 2 jobs each and spending little time together with their children. They have material resources, but they're sacrificing their quality of life in order to get them. Those people should still be considered poor because poverty goes beyond basic food, clothes, shelter, and utilities. The ability to fully participate in society is a crucial component of quality of life that might affect those considered poor in the U.S., and this problem cannot be captured by pure data on what amenities a household has. So now that we know what poverty is, how do we measure it? We think that the best way to do this is to have a multi-level system. The first, to look at extreme poverty, is based on the multidimensional poverty index. Then, to look at relative poverty, we have a capabilities measurement.
First up, there's the OPM, or Official Poverty Measure. This method was developed by Molly Orshansky in the early 1960s for use in the United States. Orshansky set thresholds for various sized families, and if the income of a family was below that threshold, they were experiencing poverty. If their income was above that threshold, they were not experiencing poverty. To determine what the threshold level should be, Orshansky saw that a family doing decently well spent about 1/3 of their income on food, so she determined that for others to be doing decently well, they would need to have an income 3 times what they spent on food to account for additional resources such as clothing, shelter, and utilities. Additionally, Orshansky determined that this threshold should be adjusted for inflation every year. However, it's not perfect. The OPM does not account for government non-cash benefits such as SNAP or food stamps, tax credits, housing, and utility subsidies. It also does not account for non-discretionary expenses, such as medical out-of-pocket expenses, childcare, or taxes. It also only views blood and legally related individuals as family, so not people just living together. It also does not account for geographic variability. People living in a big city like Chicago or New York had the same poverty threshold as those living out in the country. Furthermore, it made poverty appear black and white. It didn't show the depth of poverty. Someone right below the poverty threshold line appeared the same as someone deep in poverty. Next up, we have the SPM. In 2011, the U.S. Census Bureau created the SPM, or Supplemental Poverty Measure, to expand and correct some of the failures of the OPM. So what exactly did it do? The threshold of the SPM is a little different than the threshold of the OPM. It takes a look at the amounts all the different families spend on FCSU, or food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, and finds the amount spent of the family at the 33rd percentile. It then multiplies the amount they spend by 1.2, and that number is the threshold. This measure does take into account non-cash benefits from the government to get a better picture of the financial situation of Americans with government assistance. And it does consider non-discretionary expenses, such as out-of-pocket medical care and childcare. And it accounts for geographic variability. So people living in cities have a higher threshold than those living out in the country. But guess what? It's still not perfect. It still makes poverty appear black and white without looking at the depth of poverty and how close people are to the poverty line, and only considers money when determining poverty, not other social conditions. There must be a better way. We need a clearer picture.
Is income the best way to measure poverty? Surely money is related to quality of life, but there are other aspects at play. That's why Amartya and Martha Nussbaum developed the capabilities approach. To understand this method, we first need to identify two key terms. Functionings are the doings and beings of an individual, such as going to school or eating breakfast. In regards to poverty, it's helpful to examine these functionings as indications of that individual's quality of life. But what if someone is fasting for religious reasons? Surely that situation is different than someone else who's starving because they don't have enough food. That's where capabilities comes into the picture. Capabilities are the possibilities of what a person can choose to do. In the previous example, that individual has the capability to eat, even if they are choosing not to. That freedom of choice is very important, and that's why this approach works. It respects individual liberties while imagining the possibility of quality of life. Of course, it follows that some capabilities are more important than others. In her writings, Martha Nussbaum provided a list of the 10 central capabilities that must be met to some degree in order to ensure a baseline life of dignity. She asked the question, what does a life worthy of human dignity require? These central capabilities are life, bodily health, bodily integrity, senses, imagination and thought, emotions, practical reason, affiliation, other species, play, and control over one's environment. This list is neither exhaustive nor uncontested. But despite its imperfections, the capabilities approach is still a helpful way to discuss poverty because it goes beyond sole income and examines actual quality of life. It is essential to respect individual freedom and consider not only the internal capabilities of a person, but the external contexts that allow for their expression.
The capabilities approach is not perfect. It can be difficult to measure because of how abstract it is, but using a measurement method based on functionings can make it much more applicable to our society. It can also be subjective. Policymakers might be biased and consider some capabilities to be more important than others, or some not relevant at all, based on their own personal thoughts. That's why a more specific and quantifiable approach is needed to prevent these biases from interfering with people receiving the resources they need. That is why a different approach, one using a combination of a revised capabilities approach and a revised version of the MPI, is the best way to measure poverty. This is the MPI, or Multidimensional Poverty Index. It measures acute deprivation in 3 dimensions of poverty: health, education, and living standards. Each category has 1/3 weight over the total score and includes several subcategories. Let's start off with health. Health has 2 subcategories, nutrition and child mortality. The nutrition subcategory is not met when any person under 70 is malnourished. The second subcategory is child mortality. This subcategory is not met when any child under 18 has died in the household in the past 5 years. Next, we have education. Education also has 2 subcategories. The years of schooling subcategory is not met when no eligible household member has completed 6 years of schooling. The second is school attendance. This subcategory is not met when any school-age child is not attending school up to the age at which he or she would complete Class 8. Next, we have living standards. Living standards has 6 subcategories. Let's start with cooking fuel. Cooking fuel is not met when the household cooks with solid fuel such as dung, agricultural crop, shrubs, charcoal, wood, or coal. Next, we have sanitation. The sanitation subcategory is not met when the household has unimproved or no sanitation facility or shares with other households. The drinking water subcategory is not met when there is no safe drinking water or safe drinking water is a 30-minute or longer walk from home round trip. The electricity subcategory is not met when there is no electricity for the household. The housing subcategory is not met when there is inadequate housing materials for any floor, roof, or walls. The asset subcategory is not met when the household does not own more than one of the following, such as radio, TV, phone, computer, animal cart, bicycle, motorbike, or refrigerator, and they do not own a car or truck. So who's poor? The Global Multidimensional Poverty Index defines that if a person is deprived in a third or more of 10 weighted indicators, the global MPI identifies them as MPI poor. But it's still not perfect. We really like the proportions of how much each aspect influences the individual's level of poverty. It allows the most important needs to be prioritized by governments and nonprofits to address issues rapidly. It's not nearly as important for a household to get a TV ASAP as it is for them to have the resources to have a clean, nutritious food for their family. So, we like how nutritious food weighs 1/6 of the total poverty score, while a TV is just one part of the assets, a category of strength 1/18. However, we think that certain elements of the living standards are incredibly important and should have more weight or priority than 1/18 of the final score. Elements such as sanitation and clean water are crucial for keeping a community safe from life-threatening diseases. If households don't have a proper sanitation system, diseases could spread incredibly easily and quickly through a household or community. The government wouldn't have much opportunity to intervene before many people died. The same is true for clean water and cooking fuel. In order to live a safe and healthy life, one needs to remain protected from the potential spread of preventable malicious diseases. After all, the overall goal is to first keep people alive and safe, and then ensure they're able to participate in society. So safety should be significantly higher on the list than 1/3 of the other more important categories. That is why we propose to divide the living standards category in half, creating now 4 main categories: health, education, future health, and living standards, with equal 25% weight towards the final score, increasing the power of each sanitation, clean water, and fuel on the final score. We also believe that instead of being declared MPI poor for lacking 1/3 or more of the indicators, one should be declared MPI poor for lacking 1/6 or more of any of the MPI indicators. Each of these categories are crucial for being able to participate in society. Therefore, even lacking 1/6 of these necessary traits has a detrimental effect on one's quality of life. The revised MPI we have discussed is a good way to examine what we'd call extreme poverty, and it can be used by affluent countries to know where they should direct their international aid. But it won't tell us the full picture in affluent countries like the United States and many European countries with little extreme poverty. Even in these countries, there are still issues of financial inequality that cause people to lack the ability to fully participate in and contribute to their society. People with financial resources so low that they can't participate in their society should still be considered some level of poor, even though they are not experiencing extreme poverty. That's why we need the second half of our measurement, this time dealing with capabilities to show relative poverty.
We've already talked about why capabilities are important for well-being and why they are a crucial factor to look at when discussing poverty. Which ones will actually be covered by this measurement? We are going to examine the 10 central capabilities that Nussbaum came up with, the same 10 we've already discussed, since these are the 10 basic requirements of every human life. These can be measured by looking at functionings that correspond with each one. It might seem like this is a very abstract and impractical concept, but looking at an example might help. Take bodily health. Some functionings that represent this capability might include life expectancy, access to medical care, access to insurance, and even mortality rates. For a different category, like senses, imagination, and thought, we might want to look at education and see high school graduation rates, college graduation rates, and attendance of postgraduate schools. The data for these categories is actually already available for the government to look at. Information received during population censuses, for example, are helpful ways to measure certain functionings, and in turn extrapolate them to their respective capabilities. Each capability we measure will have a threshold, a level that must be met in order to be living a life of human dignity. Since these 10 capabilities are all crucial, even if one category is below its threshold line, the person will be classified as capability poor.
But how can this really be measured? Take the capability of bodily health, for example. The factors listed before, such as life expectancy, access to medical care, access to insurance, and mortality rates, would all be a part of the bodily health capability. Each factor would have a numerical value associated with it, such as the number of people who have health insurance, the average life expectancy, the mortality rates for common illnesses, or how many people cannot receive medical care when they need and want it. If indicators are all somewhat low, or one indicator is very low, the overall bodily health capability will fall below the threshold line, and that individual will be classified as capability poor.
This would offer a more well-rounded picture of what poverty is, because it accounts not just for income and FCSU. Instead, it examines the social and relative aspects of poverty that are crucial to identify in an affluent nation like the United States. An example of this might be someone who does not receive adequate health care due to discrimination based on ethnicity. Even if they receive a substantial income, they may not be meeting the capability for bodily health, so they should be categorized as poor so that this issue can be addressed and resolved.
Some people might argue that the qualitative aspects of a measurement like this make it less effective, such as people saying if they were able to access medical care when they needed and wanted it. But isn't the best way to see how well people are able to access the care they need simply by asking if they can? Also, some people might argue that people who lack capabilities such as play aren't really poor. Resources shouldn't be directed to them when there are other people around the world who lack basic food and water. However, that is why we have this two-part measurement of poverty with so many specifics of what exactly is lacking. The MPI measurement shows us an image of who is struggling the most, and the capabilities measurement shows us who else is struggling, but not quite enough to be classified as MPI poor. This allows us to direct aid to the MPI poor first and foremost, but also continue to improve the everyday lives of those who are capability poor. The detailed criteria used allow this two-part poverty measurement system to be easily utilized all over the world, and it allows legislators to see what exactly people are lacking so it can be addressed quickly and effectively.
It may feel like poverty is an overwhelming issue, but look at how far we've come in our ability to understand and solve it.
We certainly have a long ways to go before poverty is a thing of the past, but if we each do our part in educating ourselves and seeking active, positive change, we can make a difference.
You've already started by watching this video, so thank you. Have a great day.